So from our login screen on our Synology NAS, now we've obviously logged in as an admin. You'll see that in the top right-hand corner, this little person right here, you'll see that we are logged in as the admin, which of course is the default account that we set up when we were configuring the NAS. But now we want to look at how do you add additional users? How do you set certain permissions? How do you change passwords? All of that. So in the admin section right here, we're going to click on personal. And you'll see that by default, the description says system default user. This, of course, is the default user that was created at the very start. From here, you can actually set a new password and confirm it. You can also add some further information with regards to the admin user itself and change some further settings from within here. Okay, so that's just the first area. But what we're going to do is we're going to cancel out of that and we're going to go into our control panel, which you can access from our desktop, and select user. So in here, you'll see that there are a few users, right? I've got my admin user. I've got a separate user, which is just my initials, ED Aguero. Then I've got a guest user and then a Plex user. Of course, Plex is going to be in a future video. We're going to look at how to configure the Plex media server so that you can actually set, play movies and TV shows and things of that nature directly from your Synology NAS, which is great. So admin being our default, and then this one being a brand new account that we actually set up. Now, to create a brand new user, we can click on the create button right here. You can also just click on this little drop down just to the right of create, and you've got create user, import user, and copy user. So for example, if you may have already a list of other users that you may have already configured, you can actually select import, and you can actually do that if you so choose to, and you can browse to a file and import it. But we're just going to create a brand new user from scratch. So in here, we want to give it a specific name. Okay, so let's just give it a name of John Smith. We're going to say this is another user. You can put in an email if you want to as an option, and then you just create a password that is relevant. Okay, so we're just going to create a standard password. It's telling me that it's weak, but of course you make one that is nice and strong. You can also generate a random password if you want it something that's a little bit more complex. Send a notification mail to the newly created user. Now this is relevant if you've added an email address, okay? But that's actually really cool because let's say you have a number of administrators or a number of people who need to access the Synology NAS. You add their email address in here, and as long as the email settings are set up correctly on your Synology NAS, as soon as you create that account, John Smith will get an email saying, hey, you've been added as a user into the Synology NAS. Go ahead and log in, all right? Which is really, really good. The other options is disallow the user to change account password. So if you want to prevent the user itself, so John Smith, from actually changing the password themselves, you can actually do that from this tick option right here. And password is also valid. So we're just going to leave that as the default and select next. So now, what sort of group do you want to create? What sort of group do you want to add John Smith to? So we'll look at groups in a little while, but essentially you've got a default administrators group. So administrators being a group that allows really a lot of access into the Synology NAS. So do you want to have this person as an administrator? Do you want to just have them access just the web services over HTTP, or just be part of the standard users group? Okay, so in our case, let's make John Smith an administrator. And obviously he's going to be a user as well. So we're going to add them as a standard users group. But we'll look at groups just in a second and then sort of show you how you can actually customize these groups. We can select next. Now we actually assign shared folder permission. So we've got obviously some folders and setups already on our Synology NAS. But if you're configuring this from scratch, you may not have this yet. But of course, once you've configured SMB shares, NFS shares, things of that nature, you then create your folders within your specific areas, and then you can actually grant access, for example, to our data. This is an actual share that we've got created, and we can grant that user directly from here access to that particular shared folder. Now you can do this from another area. You can do it from this shared folder just to the left under file sharing. You can do that from that section as well. So we're just going to say we want data. We want them to be able to do a read-write access using that account. Okay. Next. So the quota for John Smith is unlimited. That's fine. So quota essentially being the usage limit, the amount of data that user can store. And we're just going to leave that as the default. Click on next. And now assign application permissions. So similar to the shared folder permissions, you've now got the apps themselves. So do you want that user to be able to get access to specific apps? So this is great because you can get really, really specific around what users can access, not only what data, what files and folders and shares, but also what apps they can get access to. So I've already got some apps already in here that I've installed. We'll go through some of these in future videos, but for example, the DSM, of course, this being our console right here, well, we want them to allow access to that. Do we want them access to other things? Well, Cloud Sync perhaps, and File Station and FTP. That's fine. You can leave the rest allow, or you can deny them if you so need to. We click on Next. Customize our speed limit. We're not going to change any of this, but essentially you can actually say what is the upload and the download limits against that user, against these specific apps, for example, or services. Next, a summary of what it's going to do, and now we select Apply. So that is now going to create that user from scratch, assign it those relevant permissions and everything else, okay? So right here, there it is, John Smith. You'll see the description is this another user. Now, if you do need to edit any of these, you can just select that user, select Edit, and you'll get access to the same area that we were in before. You can now go into User Groups, Permissions, Quota, Applications, and Speed Limits, and actually go and actually change that or add or remove specific permissions for that particular user. So the same way that you can do that for the admin, you can click on Admin and select Edit, and you can do everything for the admin as well, okay? If you need to delete the user, you select that user, select Delete, and that will delete that user from the actual Synology NAS, and then they won't be able to log in anymore. All right, so that's John Smith created. Now let's look at advanced right here. You can set some further permission settings within here within the user around the password settings themselves. So do you want to allow non-admins to reset forgotten passwords, force passwords change after administrator resets their passwords, and a whole bunch of other things. So the great thing is you can actually set specific password strength rules, very similar to what you can do on a Windows server, on a domain, for example, within Active Directory and group policies. You can actually go and set, you've got a whole bunch of users, but you want to strengthen the account access for your Synology NAS. You can actually make your password maybe 10 characters. So you want it to be a lot stronger, a lot longer, a mix of uppercase, lowercase, all of that sort of stuff. But we'll just leave it as the default for now. But just be aware that that is there. That is a really, really nice feature to have. And that will be relevant when you apply this against all the accounts. Now that's also true of password expiration. So do you want passwords to actually expire? So by default, a password will not expire on the Synology NAS. I would recommend, just out of good practice, is set your passwords to expire. So you could tick on this and then actually say, well, which add the list of users valid passwords. We can say admin, John Smith. We're going to say okay. And then we're going to say, well, passwords are valid perhaps for 60 days. So after 60 days, then that password will actually expire for that particular user. All right. So we'll just untick that for now, but that is a great option, and I highly, highly recommend that to be used. You can set things such as two-factor verification, enforce two-step verification for the following users, and the user home if you need to set that as well. We can just make that bigger. Enable a user home service, and you can actually set the volume that it's going to be a part of. That's essentially going to create a separate location or a home drive for that particular user. All right, so that is the advanced settings for the user itself. Now let's just go into our group, into here. And here we have those groups that we looked at and that we saw earlier. You've got the administrators group, the HTTP group, the users, and the video. If we select the administrators and select edit, you'll see in here a little bit of information about it. This is the system default admin group, the description that you would have seen earlier. You can change that. Permissions. Now, what do they have access to by default if they're an administrator? Quota, applications. Okay, so this is all the stuff specific to the administrators themselves. All right, so you can go and set that up in there. And then what you do is when you create your user, you apply them against a group, and all of those settings will sort of get added by default, which is really, really helpful. So the same deal with users. If I select that, permissions, you'll see that by default, the users can't really do a whole lot. All right. applications, they can't really do a whole lot. So if you create a user and you add them into the users group, they're not going to really be able to do much until you actually go and set some of these defaults right from within there. So what we did by creating John Smith, we're essentially overriding. So yes, he was added as an administrator, but then we granted specific permissions as well into that. But otherwise, they're going to be inheriting the permissions from the groups that they're creating right here. We can click on create a brand new. So we can say read only. Next. And then we're going to say, well, look, we want them to be able to access the data folder, but only read only. And we want them, we'll leave the quotas as the default. Applications, we're going to leave that as the default. Okay, so what's going to happen right there is now we've created a read-only group. And when we add a user to that read-only group, it'll automatically grab those permissions, and then they'll only be able to read the data on that folder that we selected. All right, so that's users and groups. Now you can also go into administrators, for example, and edit members, and you'll see exactly the members as part of that. So you can do that from the users area, you can do that from the group area, and you can select, add, or remove the users directly from within there. So that's a little bit about users and groups. So what I could do right now is I could then log out of my Synology NAS. I could then log in as my new user, John Smith. Then if you want to get a lot more fancy, and this is for another video, you can then look at domains and actually join your Synology NAS to a domain, to an Active Directory domain, for example, and then take advantage of users within a domain, within an Active Directory file structure. Okay, so that's something else that you can consider, but we've just looked at the local users and groups within our Synology NAS.